Welcome back, class. I am Mr. Betts, and you have a Great Depression test in about 10 minutes. And I know what you're thinking. How am I ever going to take this test? How am I going to remember all those acronyms? Don't worry, I have got you covered. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to go over 50 terms, people, events, program, acts that you're going to need to remember to ace your Great Depression test. Brother, can you spare a dime? And by a dime, I mean a dime a time. Let's get depressing. The Great Depression. It was a severe economic depression throughout the world and throughout the 1930s. Now, just what is a depression? It's a long downturn of economic activity. It's not just a recession, it's like a falling off the cliff calamity. Now, there's many reasons why it happened, and you can check them out here, but let's talk about the stock market, where you can buy and sell shares of a corporation. Throughout most of the 20s, it was booming, and this made many, many people rich. Part of this was because they were able to buy on margin, which meant that you paid just a little and your stockbroker paid the rest, aided by the bank. This made overnight millionaires, but eventually the stock market crashed in late October 1929. Millions upon millions of shares sold, values plummeted, fortunes evaporated, and while the stock market crash is the start to the Great Depression, it is not the cause of the Great Depression. It's been brewing for a while. The wealth gap, or the gap between the rich and the poor, had been steadily increasing. The 1% owned 1/3 of America's wealth, whereas today they own 2/5, and I think my poor understanding of fractions has lulled me into a false sense of security. Overproduction in factories led to increased unemployment, which then led to a decreased ability to buy products, which led to less demand, which led to more unemployment. You get the picture. Credit was becoming a problem as more people were racking up debt, buying consumer goods like cars and washing machines on installment plans. Yeah, and when those people lost their jobs, they still had those bills. Likewise, many farmers defaulted on their loans. See, World War I was a really great time for American farmers because Europeans were out, killing each other, so they couldn't farm. So a lot of our farmers took out loans to expand their operations. But when the war was done, overproduction was actually driving prices down, and many farms went under. And when all of these factors converged together, it led to an international depression, with most of the European countries going down as well. They were already frail enough coming out of World War I, and the American Great Depression was just enough to push everybody over the edge. Plus, you have the Hawley-Smoot Tariff, a massive protective tariff by the US that pretty much halted international trade. Soon other countries passed their own protective tariffs, and nobody was buying each other's stuff. Unemployment meant that it really wasn't a big deal because you didn't have the money to buy anything anyway. 25% of America was unemployed by 1932. Hoovervilles were makeshift communities of shacks and shelters where those who lost their homes might live, and of course they were named after Herbert Hoover, the president at the time. Now, yes, the Great Depression wasn't Hoover's fault, but his policy of rugged individualism, where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or at the most you're aided by local charities and government in recovery, it led many then and now to pin the misery on him. Also under his watch was the Bonus Army, a group of World War I veterans that marched and camped out in Washington, D.C. They had been promised a bonus for fighting in World War I that was going to be paid in 1945, and they kind of wanted it now because they were starving. And in response, Hoover sent the current army to go break them up, much to the horror of everyone. This isn't to say that Hoover didn't do anything good. There were public works programs like highways and parks, and the Hoover Dam was actually built during his presidency, but it soon became clear that laissez-faire, hands-off government was not going to get us out of this one. Enter Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Democratic presidential nominee and distant cousin to Teddy Roosevelt, though that didn't quite guarantee him the Roosevelt endorsement. In fact, Edith Roosevelt, Teddy's widow, actively campaigned for Hoover. That's got to make for an awkward Thanksgiving. Still, the election of 1932 went to FDR, the first of his 4 presidential victories, and he hit the ground running in his first 100 days, proposing programs, laws, and regulations that we collectively put together as the first New Deal. And this is where the alphabet soup portion of our review begins. You got the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, putting 3 million men back to work planting trees, preserving parks, and building bridges and levees. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration Overproduction, or FERA, gave money to the states to help the poor, unemployed, and needy. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, or AAA, tried to raise farm prices and control production through subsidies. The Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, meant to control flooding, promote conservation, and bring electricity to those in areas that never had it before. The National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA, was passed to help businesses regulate themselves, something that they needed after Harding and Coolidge and Hoover. It created the NRA. No, not that NRA, the National Recovery Administration, which encouraged businesses to make minimum wages, to abolish child labor, and to set fair prices. The Public Works Administration, or PWA, gave people jobs through huge public works like New York City's Lincoln Tunnel and Washington's Grand Coulee Dam. The Emergency Banking Relief Act set out to reorganize and reopen many banks, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, tried to instill confidence in the banks by having the governments guarantee the money people were putting in them. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, was created to rein in stock speculators and crooked stockbrokers. I also gotta give a shout out to Frances Perkins, who helped a ton with these programs, seeing as she was Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, and might I add, the first woman appointed to the presidential cabinet. The Dust Bowl during the 1930s in the Great Plains saw black blizzards of just dried up soil dust covering entire areas, forcing people like the Okies to move to California and become migrant workers who move from farm to farm in search of work. This is actually the setting for John Steinbeck's incredible novel, The Grapes of Wrath. The Great Migration of African Americans out of the South continued as many lost their jobs to white workers or lost their farms altogether. They did not find significantly better conditions in the North. The Indian New Deal was a collection of reforms that actually benefited Native Americans. It halted the sale of reservation lands, restored traditional tribal governments, provided jobs. I'm sorry, I'm just not used to US and Native American relations actually going well for the Native Americans. Mexican immigration actually reversed at this time, with 500,000 Mexicans returning to Mexico. It might have been because the government was offering free one-way tickets, or it might have been because of severely increased discrimination. Entertainment in the form of radios and movies allowed for a distraction and get away from the hardships of life. You could listen to classic programs like Red Ryder.
No, I want an official Red Ryder combination 200 millimeter rifle.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Yes, that one. Or watch films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, The Wizard of Oz, or one of my personal favorites, King Kong, in which the titular ape climbs the newly completed Empire State Building. Father Charles Coughlin also used the radio to get his message across, first calling for economic reform and later on just sounding like a crazy anti-Semitic fascist. Senator Huey Long also called for economic reforms, ideally heavily taxing the rich. Some say that he might have actually given Roosevelt a run for his money in 1936 had he not been assassinated in 1935. Also in 1935, we saw the Second New Deal, a massive set of reforms and programs, the like of which America had never seen before. The Works Progress Administration, or WPA, took the idea of the PWA's public works programs and shrunk it, targeting public buildings, bridges, roads, as well as supporting cultural workers like artists, writers, and musicians. The Social Security Act created a tax that would fund Social Security, which provides pensions for the elderly, funds unemployment insurance, and helps the disabled. And while some said this would turn the country into a welfare state, others pointed out that doesn't the Constitution state a goal of providing for the general welfare? The Fair Labor Standards Act was like a sequel to the NRA, banning child labor and setting a minimum wage of 40 cents per hour. Not bad, that's about how much I earn making YouTube videos. The Wagner Act guaranteed workers a right to form unions and use collective bargaining, and if you're asking if it was legal for FDR to do this, you wouldn't be the only one, especially when FDR tried to pack the courts or convince Congress to expand the amount of Supreme Court justices from 9 to 15, with optimally those extra 6 being very New Deal friendly justices. Congress replied with, "What? Are you crazy?" Meanwhile, the rest of the world was going through the Great Depression in their own ways. Communism was firmly in control in Russia, with Joseph Stalin crushing any opposition. Fascism, or strict social and economic control by a strong central government, usually led by a dictator, was spreading across Europe, most notably with the Italian fascists led by Mussolini and German Nazis led by Adolf Hitler. When isolationism continued to be the policy of America prior to the breakout of World War II, even passing neutrality acts which banned the sale of weapons to countries at war. War. Maybe we didn't want to get involved, and maybe we remembered that nobody had paid us for the last bunch. Now that's not going to last for very long. Soon war is going to break out in Europe, and FDR is going to draw up the Atlantic Charter with British PM Winston Churchill, that while not committing us militarily to anything, plans for the defeat of the Nazis and what the post-war world is going to look like. But of course that isolationist stance is going to change with the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, one of the Axis powers, on December 7th, 1941. So yes, while FDR and the New Deals helped us get through the Great Depression, it's this wartime shift that will actually pull us out of it. Did I make it? Awesome! 2 for 2. It's like, I don't know whether there was ever any doubt. 10 minutes, all you need. 10 minutes to ace. Well, that should set you up to rock your Great Depression test. And another good strategy is just to wear my official MrBettsClass t-shirt, available at my Redbubble store, linked down below. If you like this video, click the button that lets me know, leave a comment down below, and make sure you subscribe, because it's a long school year, but we're gonna get through it together. Be safe, and I'll see you next time.